Hello friends, welcome again to Archie Sharma's YouTube channel. Our today's topic is Principles of Teaching English and it is the second part. The principle of passive and active vocabulary. One objective of teaching English is to increase vocabulary of students. There are two kinds of vocabulary, as you can see, passive vocabulary and active vocabulary. Passive vocabulary. This type of vocabulary is not used in speaking and writing, but the words of passive vocabulary are recognized and understood. Active vocabulary. The words of active vocabulary are understood and freely used by the learner in speaking and writing. A fruitful learning is when recognized and understood words are used as active vocabulary. It means words of passive vocabulary should be used as active one. For instance, the word elegant is in passive vocabulary. The teacher should try to bring this word in the active vocabulary of the students. When the student starts using the word elegant off and on, then the word getty should be taken over and so on. Next is the principle of practice and drill. Language is an art, likewise needs a sustained practice and drill, or what is called as habit forming. Language can be easily and quickly taught through practice and drill in the language learning materials. Drill is to exercise by regular practice. Each work is significant in this expression. Drill is an exercise, hence an activity. May be physical or mental. It has to be done regularly through repeated practice. For example, a swimmer cannot learn swimming. For that, he is to swim. No amount of theoretical groundwork in the activity of swimming would be yield any results unless he is pushed into a pool under a careful eye and practice his strokes. Similarly, a child learns a language by deliberate, conscious, regular and meaningful activity. Thus, practice and drill is another principle of language learning of language. As a skill, come by practice and practice makes it perfect. The teacher should provide the opportunity for practice and drill in the teaching of foreign language in the classroom. The aim and purpose of language practice and drill is to enable the students to pick up the right words and sentence pattern without any difficulty. The teacher should give practice and drill during his teaching in his classroom. The advantage of practice and drills is to enable the students to get mastery over the language patterns automatically and unconsciously. Drill practice is a kind of exercise. It can be orally or written. There are some types of practice drill. As you can see that types of drills: conversation drill, imitation drill, substitution drill, role playing activities and question answer drill. First we just talk about the conversation drill. Question answer drill involves mutual verbal intercourse including different type of sentences. An English teacher should organize a conversation drill program by selecting the interesting topics for conversation. Question answer drill is useful for lower classes, but at senior stage, conversation drill is necessary to develop speech. Second is imitation drill. In this drill, a language pattern is given by the teacher and students are asked to imitate it orally. By doing so, the learner memorizes the pattern. Next, substitution drill. In substitution drill, a model pattern of the language item is given by the teacher and students are asked to make sentences by substituting the relevant words in the same model pattern. Next, role-playing activities. This is also a form of conversation and based upon playway technique. The students who participate in these activities, they should be given some incentives such as prizes and certificates. The school should organize the cultural and literary activities in which the students should participate and play an interesting role. Last is question and answer drill. Question and answer drill is very useful for the teaching learning process of English language. The teacher puts questions and the students give their answers to the classroom. For this purpose, class can be divided into two groups. One group for questions and other group for answers. After some time, the order of the group activity will be changed. The students will be able to know how to frame questions and how to answer them. Next is the principle of learning by doing. This principle stresses on acquiring skill by doing. A foreign language can be learned quickly and easily by doing the language activities. Learning by doing is known as the activity principle. Various aspects of language learning such as words, phrases, sentences, idiom, grammar, the basic skills of listening, speaking, reading and writing need actual doing. A child to speak a word must roll it on his tongue, sort of feel it before uttering it. This is essentially an activity process. Similarly, for other linguistic skills and habit forming processes, activity is a must. This activity may be learning spellings with the help of wooden blocks with letters painted on it, completion of unfinished pictures, flashcards, or matching figures with words. This process is different from habit forming. In habit forming, one has to perform drills and exercises rapidly and regularly, thus rendering the process, at least at times, boring, uninteresting, and monotonous. There is no such repercussion in the activity principle as activity learning is fun and is rightly called playway. In this principle, all the activities may be performed using different situations of classroom and outside classroom. Next is the principle of proper order. The language learning is a skill which involves four distinct activities: listening, speaking, reading and writing. Listening is the language of ear. Speaking is the language of tongue. Reading is the language of eyes and writing is the language of hand. The proper order of learning a language is listening, speaking, reading and writing. As Mr. J. A. Bright proposed the following order of teaching, which is based on his experiment of learning English as foreign language. He said that first we use listening, second is speaking, third is writing and fourth is reading. Mr. Bright found that reading becomes easy when writing is learned before reading, because in this way associations between symbols and sounds can be made. Therefore, this order of teaching should be mentioned. Besides, this principle of proper order, principle of proportion should be followed. It means that while teaching a language, due and equal emphasis should be put on each aspect. Next is the principle of selection. The principle is based on the assumption that the total language material cannot be taught within a short time. Therefore, there is the need of selection of language materials to be prescribed for the different grades. The criteria to choose a particular course for particular class is called the principle of selection. Hence, we can say we can teach only limited things within a limited period. Teaching method should be selected keeping the following principles in the mind. First is availability. It refers to two things. First is whether the word is convenient to teach, as table, chair, pen, book are due to their availability in the classroom. Second is whether the words is useful, as plate, spoon, salt, cup are due to their indispensable availability in house. Second is coverage. In words with more covering capacity should be selected. By coverage or covering capacity is mean that the number of words a word can display. For example, the word salad displays wheat, rice and pulses. Next principle is frequency. In it, those words and structures should be selected which are used by frequently in the language. And last is range. Range shows the number of situations in which a word and structure can be used. The words and structures having a great range should be selected in the syllabus of English language. Range show the number of situations in which a word can be used. For example, there are two words, sky and have. Sky word can be used in one situation, only whereas have can be used in three situations. For example, I have read the book, have some sweets, I have 3 sarees. Wherever the range of sky is very short, whereas have has a long range. Words of longer range should be selected for teaching. Teachability. Next principle is teachability. Those words and structures should be selected which can be taught easily by various devices. The word flower can be taught easily by showing a flower or by sketching a flower or by showing a picture of a flower. But to teach affection is difficult. So, preferences should be given to those words which can be easily taught by various devices. Next is learnability. Psychologists are of the view that things should be taught according to the age. The language material should be chosen keeping in view the learnability of our students according to their age and level of their standard. And last is daily usefulness. In it, words which are of daily use at home, in school and in society should be selected for teaching. So the above 7 principles of selection emphasis on the selection of useful material. Next principle is the principle of language aptitude. According to our educationalists, for learning a language, language aptitude is needed. There are some main components of language aptitude which should be developed in students. These components are phonetic coding, means ability to code sound in such a way that can be remembered. Second is grammar, means ability to handle grammar. Role memorization, and last is inferring linguistic rules, patterns, etc. Now the principle of phonology. As Professor Kitson says, learning to speak a language is always by far the shortest road to learning to read it and to write it. Spoken language depends on sounds and written language depends on sight. But it is hard to remember written symbols without attaching them with spoken symbols. Therefore, teaching a foreign language should start with hearing sounds and speaking the language. In no case it should start from writing. Next principle is principle of interest. This principle is very significant principle. Interest makes the bird go. It is one single major factor that permeates the entire edifice of human activity, and learning is no exception to it. Language learning can be very enjoyable experience provided the correct messages are generated. If the English teacher is good, students will look forward to that class, bunk any other class but of that teacher. Here the subject gets identified with the personality of that teacher and arouse the pupil interest in the subject. For successful communication, pupil interest should be aroused and sustained over a considerable period of time. Remove all tension, remove all misgivings about English from the tender minds of your students. It is a beautiful language of a beautiful people. Handle it with respect, sympathy, and care so that right structures are generated and learning takes place. If the teacher is successful in creating interest in students to learn the foreign language, half the battle is won. And interest can be aroused by audiovisual aids. In it, we can take pictures, charts, gramophone, records, making the material meaningful as related to life, and doing different types of activities as speaking, reading, and writing. Now, the next principle is the principle of oral and oral approach. The child learns speaking his mother tongue before reading and writing it. The beginner should be taught with speech lessons in which words and small sentences are to be heard and listened. Oral practice is quickest way of learning a language. Oral approach is based on the psychological foundations which must be applied in the beginning stage. There are the some following advantages of oral speech, as it promotes fluency of speech, it lays the foundation of correct pronunciation, sentences is the unit of speech, mastering our functional grammar, strengthens listening and speaking skills, develops reading and writing skills, easy evaluation of the performance, economical approach. In oral approach, much can be stated by the learner in short period. It gave a lot of time. Written work take a lot of time. It requires a lot of about and time for correction work and follow-up work. So, in last we can say that these are the various principles of foreign language teaching. If the teacher wants to teaching to be fruitful, if he wants to rate the learning to be accurate, he must follow these principles in teaching. Hence is a Chinese proverb which reveals the importance of playing and doing activities. As what we hear, we forget. What we see, we remember. What we do, we learn. The sole duty of a language teacher is not only to get mastery over the language, but to prepare his students of high moral values and character through the expression of good thoughts and feelings, on the basis of which we can make a human society from the inhuman one. Now thank you to listen me, and we just meet again in our next video.